She's got everything we like for. She's got everything I need. Takes the wheel when I see him double.
I've been to Francis McKee in the Electron Club. And, we didn't really have any kind of script for this conversation. But every time we bumped into each other, started a kind of rap on the Haight-Ashbury scene in California and the Grateful Dead, open source, the Commons, and various other aspects of music.
Yeah. The music keeps coming up for me a lot. But as a model,
How would it go if you says a bit about the Electron Club first, about
yeah.
how it appeared to you, or maybe how it relates to how you think about things?
Yeah, well, I suppose when it came in, we decided to try a different economic model for the CCA, which was to give away a lot of the spaces rather than charge everyone for every space and try and make money through rents. We tried, rather than making money, we tried to get activity in the building and thought that was a better way for the building to work. But the more activity, the more the public money would be justified in keeping it open. Mm-hmm. Rather than us making more profits, which we didn't actually make because the people we want don't have any money. So there was a kind of obvious way to go, which was to go free. And then we started looking for models for that. And at the same time, the Electron Club, we were converting spaces. The Electron Club used to be the director's office. Technically, this should be my office, just for me, but it's about the size of a football pitch. Yeah. So it seemed totally pointless having it for the use of one person. It seemed crazy. So we thought this space would become an autonomous space, which is the Electron Club, which we try to keep away from and have very little control over. And so, as you know, it's a club that people can join and you work out what you're doing separately. And we like that, particularly within the context of other things. We go from that to some commercial rents in other parts of the building with other organisations. And we thought we'd have a kind of mixed economy of some people renting space, which is all subsidised by us, even when it's commercial, to spaces that are autonomous and don't pay rent and that have a totally different, kind of ethos than ourselves. The very other end of the spectrum, and that would keep us honest, so to speak, or at least thinking about why we exist and how we exist in terms of giving people space. So the Electron Club's got that.
It's interesting because when you compare it, there's a lot of community centres in different places just now. The budget, there's no money, and the tendency is to kind of put the rents up.
Yeah,
stop people using the places rather than just let them use the place if it's paying the heat and whatever anyway.
Yeah, and our funders are like that. Originally they thought, well, you're crazy, you should be maximising your rents, and it seemed counterintuitive to charge nothing. But actually then you get people coming. Secondly, they're very happy to be here and feel some ownership of the building. And thirdly, they're going to support you when times are tough, and actually you make a community of people who are kind of interlocked and they feel that it's their space as well as your space, not the CCA as some kind of pompous curatorial entity on its own. So you actually get a lot more people feeling that they have a right to use the space and it's their space, which it is, because they paid for it, it's public money. So all of that and the activity, and that much activity, the funders began to see that was actually worth the money they'd already put in. We get 300,000 people through the door now. Mm-hmm. We'll do 500 events a year, 19 exhibitions, 17 residencies. That's quite a lot of stuff.
Yeah.
Without any extra money. We all work part-time, so they're getting a lot back for their money, and a lot of other people that they support are getting free space here, and including them at times, the funders and the city and everyone. So the volunteers for the Commonwealth Games will be here. So there's a lot of stuff happening here all the time by opening it up and actually using it, because the argument is if you're not using it, you don't need us. So it has to be completely used all the time. So that, we thought that's the way to go. People just don't have the money to give us rents, but they need the space and they need the activity, and that's why you've got the public building in the first place. So it's all driven by that activity and momentum rather than profit. Because we're not going to make a profit, so it's a bad business model to think you're going to make a profit in an area where there's no profit to be made. It just seems crazy. So there had to be a different economic model, and that brought us to things like the Electron Club. It's kind of almost like a weird conscience to the place, and then to things like the Grateful Dead and California as a different way to treat music. So like we've been living through a period where everybody is charging for music and everyone's being sued and the Pirate Bay is being hounded for giving away music. And at the same time, Grateful Dead, right from the start, let people tape their concerts and help them tape the concerts and set them up technically so they could tape the concerts better. And then all the tapes circulated, and 40 years later the Grateful Dead were still the highest earning band in the world when they shouldn't have even existed.
Yeah.
Because the tapes grew the loyalty, and any time they put out any kind of legal product, people bought that as well. It didn't interfere with their own attempt to sell records or t-shirts or anything, but it kept them in the public eye and it kept people loyal, kept people loving them, kept the music going, and by giving it all away they got it back in different form. So that was a big help. And that was a different way of thinking about music that went counter to what's happening still with the music industry.
Trucking, got my chips cashed in, keep trucking, like the two dumb men together. Oh, that's it.
I was reading I should have brought it with me, Mark Callahan, The Trouble with Music. He's a American guy. He was over here, he did a gig in that cafe in the south side, the Glad Cafe.
Yeah.
It was quite nice. It was McConnell, the Revolution, the Irish Revolutionary.
Yeah.
It's a McConnell songbook. And he'd created a band in America and redone all McConnell's songs and the ones he enjoyed.
Yeah.
But it was a nice gig because it wasn't this just playing music the whole night. We'd play some songs, then he'd stop, and then we'd have a discussion.
Yeah.
And there was a lot of old guys for the union and stuff there. So it was really brilliant, just sitting, chatting away for about 20 minutes. Then he would play another couple of songs.
Yeah.
So it was a dead nice education process of the meaning of the songs.
Yeah.
And the kind of book's full of that kind of stuff about now it's like the music business is about, what is it about?
Yeah.
The least of it is the music, and the rest is just the mince that's kind of in between.
And it was it was always a bad industry anyway, because the money never went to the musicians. It went to the music companies, and they invested in making CDs after vinyl, so you had to replace all your vinyl with CDs. Then you had to replace it with cassettes, and you just kept replacing the formats, but you're still buying the same Rolling Stones album from 1966. But they weren't investing in young bands anymore, just different formats and consumerism. So the music, it kind of killed itself.
It's interesting. I was reading a bit in the book. He was talking about that you come from California in the 60s, late 60s. All these bands, Grateful Dead, Jeff and Zare, playing different people.
Yeah.
They were all in the union.
Yeah.
They were all union members.
Yeah.
Because that's the only way you could play the clubs. You
Yeah.
were in a union. And he was talking about that. Once they become famous or whatever, they become these people rather than workers. Musicians and all. And it's kind of reverted back to that idea where you couldn't sell your CDs because people were downloading them free. What do you think about that? And it was talking about, it says, well, what did you do when you couldn't get a record contract?
Yeah.
You created your own record companies, and you gave yourself a contract. And just now, okay, companies are taking over, but the thing you've got is what you've always had is the music.
Yeah.
You've got live music.
Yeah.
So stop giving it to them for nothing.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Stop playing in places for nothing and paying people money.
Yeah.
So it's back to this thing, unionise.
Yeah.
Unionise and make a decent wage.
It's true.
You don't need to become famous. You can still play your music, enjoy yourself, and make a good living wage.
Well, it's becoming we're at a kind of transition point, even with the new digital stuff, like even with Amazon, which is kind of claims to be the future. I already think it's the past. That they're beginning to squeeze all the independent musicians and the independent record companies and the independent publishers, to maximise the amount they can get out of them, or they won't distribute them. But actually, I think you could use the same technology to set up a not-for-profit distribution company that would do the same thing, but just not try to maximise the profits from the independents. So you could actually distribute things more freely as well. and again take it away from big. It's this whole idea that everything must be a business model that maximizes profit and destroys the art. But actually, I think with using the same tools, you could take that away from them again. So
and the Grateful Dead again, you know, the record company dragged them in and asked them, he says, you need to get a hit. I haven't had a hit. And he says, we don't want a hit.
Yeah, they didn't even put out singles half the
We
time.
want to keep the band together and stuff. We don't.
Yeah.
So at the end, they were telling record companies that,
Yeah.
you know, we'll just, you know.
Yeah. They couldn't do anything with them. And the records would still sell just because they toured so hard.
Mm-hmm.
And anything they put out would sell. And now they put out their versions of the concerts that are cleaned up, but the live versions by the audience are still out there for free, and the audience takes both. You know, the audience can buy the album and take the free album at the same time with the same concert. They're kind of so geeky anyway that they want both, so it hasn't interfered with what they wanted it to do.
Which comes down to the kind of vehicle that carries a lot of this stuff, the Internet Archive.
Yeah.
Which amazingly a lot of filmmakers and artists and photographers don't know exists.
Yeah.
But you know, if you're a Dead fan, the Deadhead,
Yeah.
you can tell when Jerry Garcia, which guitar he played in a particular track, at a particular concert at a particular time, and what gauge of strings he was using in his SG or whatever. You know,
It's true. That's why people know more about them than they do about other bands from the same time. I love that. I love the way everybody archives it, like Wikipedia as well.
Mm-hmm.
The kind of that mass movement of people archiving stuff, and it's almost invisible now, but it's holding up the web. And if you took away Wikipedia, what would people do?
Yeah.
So those things are all kind of driven by us, not driven by other people. So I think there's great scope in it. I think.
And the new, well, it's been going for about a year or two. Spirit of Revolt.
Oh yeah. Yeah.
You know, which is that'll be going into the Internet Archive, which is a kind of more parochial version, but dead important.
It is
Really important that you can look at some of the work that's been done, because you know, people that's involved in all these activities, they don't really get much out of it. So it's nice they've actually got an archive and you can refer to this stuff and take out these ideas. You know, like I talk to quite a lot of young people, you know, and you introduce them to the whole Earth catalogue and stuff. Yeah. And this was all pre-internet, you know, that this was like, but when the internet came along, they just grabbed it. You know, they just grabbed it, saying, "Oh, this is the thing," and so you can still download the whole catalogue of the.
It's true.
The
And
whole
actually,
Earth catalogue.
the guy behind it, Stuart Brand, he started The Well, which is one of the first online communities.
That's right, the Well. Yeah.
So there's a big link. There's a big link, always for me, between the hippies in San Francisco and the software companies in San Francisco. They all came from San Francisco as well. And actually both Microsoft and the early Apple computer clubs, they all benefited from the sales of communes, hippie communes. So there's this weird kind of connection from the sale of hippie communes, putting the money into computer clubs in California. So the link is actually direct at times. And when the communes as well, they argued that the communes were the first experiment, and the hippies were the first experimenters of what do you do when you get a cybernetic society and there are no more jobs for people. How do you live when there's no jobs and no income? And that the communes were the first example of people trying to do that and dropping out of the system. And they actually, you can see YouTube clips where they argue this quite explicitly, that hippies are the first experimenters with the future when everything is mechanized and computerized and there are no jobs, which is coming more and more. So maybe it's true. But at least they thought that when they were doing it.
If my words did glow with the gold of sunshine, and my tunes were played on the harp unstrung.
Well, I suppose it's the thing, like in Detroit and places like that, it's the idea about rethinking work.
Yeah.
You know, the jobs are away, jobs are gone, but they're never going to get that mass, well, in the West anyway, that mass, you know, everybody getting a job. So you have to rethink work. What do we need to do?
Yeah.
And that's exactly what we're thinking about then.
Yeah.
You know, because the rainforests were getting murdered 40 years ago. It's nothing new.
Yeah.
You know, when you could buy the Sunday Times and educate yourself with a magazine.
Yeah.
You know, you go into anybody's flat, there was always about 40, a big pile of Sunday Times magazines because it was like a encyclopedia.
Yeah.
You know, and you could find masses of stuff about the rainforest, you know, when these broadsheets were wide enough to have opinions that people would be interested in thinking about, you know, on the left and right. It was a good width there. And you know, and these kind of ideas, and then the kind of cycle comes back round again. And you know, so these opportunities, all the templates for these opportunities that people are doing just now are there.
They are.
And it's, you know, you're not getting back in the past. You're just using the ideas and how people worked them out and the scale of them, what happened to them, what we done wrong, etc. You know, you can.
Yeah.
I think that's what's missing a lot nowadays is you need that reference model to see what had been tried before.
It's true. There's a bit of a gap because the people who were doing it the first time knew that there might be a better way to do it, and actually kind of kept pushing for things like, you know, the Grateful Dead pushing for internet, and there's big connections between them and internet as well. The development of internet through one of the open source foundations they funded, and several of their members ended up joining. So they were kind of pushing for that all the time, but then kind of younger people using it today don't realise that link backwards. So and the people who set it all up are all kind of fading away or disappearing.
Yeah.
And
it was all a community thing.
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah.
It was basically the super highway. What was it? Super information highway.
Yeah.
You know, and nobody noticed it turned into e-commerce.
Yeah.
You know, and they started putting tolls all over the highway, and when you look back at the history of that stuff, it was brilliant. It was just it was community. It was just people doing things. But I think the problem with a lot of the open source stuff nowadays is people are only interested in the open source.
Yeah.
They're not really that bothered about what it's doing or how you can use it to build movements or whatever. You know, it's just the freedom of the source, but kind of draw the line there.
It's true. Well, that's where I like Mexico, because I go to Mexico a lot, but to the Zapatistas and things like that, where they kind of have combined open source and use of internet with their own survival, having emerged in the jungle 20 years ago, exactly this year. This is their anniversary of 20 years of having taken over Chiapas and created an autonomous space. But they then use internet to keep their profile alive in the wider world, so that the army just can't come in and massacre them and they disappear, because they're so visible on internet. They're so linked to the rest of the world through that. As a community, they survive. So they've used internet really cleverly to kind of create this kind of sense of community that also keeps the real community alive. And then scattered throughout the country, there's a whole series of...
I think that's probably the thing. They've always had a strong community.
Yeah,
and
totally.
they've taken that and they've put that on the internet, whereas a lot of people are trying to create the community on the internet.
Yeah.
But the community has to exist on its own.
Yeah, you have to.
And then you can use the internet to expand it or improve it or whatever.
Yeah.
And that's probably why they're more successful.
Yeah.
Because they were ready for that technology.
Yeah.
They had the infrastructure already there.
It's true. It's a good point, because you see the difference between what they produce as content and what a bunch of kind of people who are into gaming produce through an online community, where they've never seen each other and don't even know what height or sex or age any of each other are, because they all talk to each other under avatars.
Yeah.
So it's not really a community. It's just a bunch of people online together, but they don't have any real sense of what that means as a community. So the Zapatistas are a good model because they do, and they've got it on the ground as well. You need it on the ground. You need the local community on the ground.
Yeah. There's a lot of oppression about just now with the rentier society. Thatcher sold all the houses, this, that, and the next thing. But alongside that, there's all this amazing opportunity.
Yeah.
We've got the tools, we've got the place, and people have kind of lost it a bit. That there's a lot of people involved, and there's lots of really brilliant things happening, but there isn't any kind of wider scope for it. There isn't any wider context.
Yeah.
And people have become kind of obsessed with process.
Yeah.
They just it's all about how to do things and better ways to do it, particularly in the internet. People, it's all story. People want revolution, but nobody wants to do the dishes. But nobody wants to start doing the boring stuff or thinking of ways of making the boring stuff interesting.
Yeah.
So you can socialise it and get people working and really using the technology, to do what it is they're trying to do, rather than the technology leading, the next best thing you could. Is it mature enough now? Is it become mature enough that we can actually use it as a kind of, for mature ideas?
I don't know. I think that connects to something else. That, say, Taksim Square and Cairo and all of those revolutions, what you call the kind of the Arab Spring or the revolutions in squares around the world, where everyone gets together. And say Taksim Square is a good example of that, where you got 3 different football team supporters who all hate each other, all came together with kind of the gay left, student, liberal protest movement in Istanbul as well. And they all got on and all kind of sat and protested together. Kind of almost emotionally, that they knew they all wanted change, but they didn't know what it was. And then obviously the riots start, and the water cannons come in, and that's all dispersed. But a lot of those, and even the Occupy movement, kind of were very inarticulate movements. They knew they wanted change, but they didn't know what they wanted. It was the first step, and then they realised they had this power when they all got together. But then Occupy, in a way, didn't articulate anything very clearly, and Istanbul didn't articulate anything very clearly, but they all realised that was the first step. And now the next step, and internet was very useful in that, Twitter in particular, but then the next step is to sort of think, how do they replace the old politics with new politics? And I think they've just reached that stage. Everyone's reached that stage of, well, we know that if we protest in the square, we find we have the power. We know we don't like what already exists. There's no point going home and voting Labour or Conservative or whatever. But then what do we do? What's the next step? How do you create a new political power or system that will actually achieve something that you do want? And I think they're only beginning to mature into that now, because to a lot of people it looks like everyone is defeated. And David Graeber, who was one of the Occupy leaders, is really good on that. He says the left is really bad at understanding that it actually achieves things. So it looks at Occupy and thinks, well, that was a failure. It looks at it, Taksim Square, and thinks that was a failure, or Seattle was a failure in the riots, and doesn't realise that actually it's shifted everyone's opinion. It's made sort of people scared that are in power. It's empowered a lot of other people. It's made huge advances because the left has educated itself into thinking in terms of defeat and not seeing tangible advances. So there's something there that the next stage of maturity is kind of people realising they are succeeding, and then how do they take that forward, and how do they begin to articulate or build something different? So I think that's where they are next. Maybe internet's part of that, but again I think it starts with the people sitting around the garden talking about what do we do next.
It's interesting the floods, the thing in New York, when there's a friend of mine that gives them updates, stays in New York, and she's going, oh, this is terrible, and oh, this is bad. But it was what was happening outside New York, in these places where they'd taken away all the foliage and stuff, and it was easier to flood. But when the flooding started, it was the community just automatically turned into help each other mode. And the cyclists were all cycling in, the Occupy people were all cycling into New York on bikes with food and stuff. And the community and the big outfit that was there, FEMA, what do you call it? FEMA, they weren't doing nothing. And the people were, and it was brilliant to watch, Democracy Now! And it's just going, these people know what to do.
Yeah.
They just, and I'm saying, this is brilliant, this is beautiful, you have to understand this is what happens, and this is how things happen. People just decide to do it on their own. You don't wait for somebody to come in. But a lot of people could see that, oh, it's terrible, everybody. You couldn't recognise these brilliant things going on.
Yeah.
They would just, and I just thought, that's all you have to do is continue that.
Yeah.
Keep that going as a sort of community.
I think it's the next step. Because I think the Occupy people moved into that. New Orleans, whole movements have come out of New Orleans. I think the same in Istanbul. Different movements have emerged, and they're smaller and they're still just growing, but they've kind of realised. But we haven't seen the next stage yet, and it won't really just happen in the same way. But I think there will be new things emerging from that realisation. Some people in that realised, actually we can do this, we can organise all that ourselves. So that's coming, I think.
maybe it is that time where you go back, like the artists in the studio, you don't have exhibitions every 5 minutes. You have to sit, consider. Maybe people are. I mean, the project I'm doing in Govern's a bit like that. Have events and you're talking to people about you doing this, and people are falling out with each other, and it's kind of chaos. Sometimes you just have to step back.
Yeah.
And that's one of the things the guy says when we visited Detroit. He says, you have to figure out this vision about where you're going, some kind of structure about what you're doing.
Yeah.
It's good having all these brilliant community things, but you need them in some kind of context. And that kind is the thing, is people are going to have to sit back, forget about this stuff.
Yeah.
Because the technology just pushes you onto doing things the whole time.
Yeah.
And you're thinking, I'll just look at this again,
Yeah.
and you just have to divorce yourself from this thing and go back and sit in the studio or whatever, have a good think about it.
Yeah, I think you do need to. Also, you need to do it because if you don't, you automatically default to the models that exist, and the models that exist don't work.
It's just a continuum.
Yeah.
It's just a continuum.
You just get another political party like the parties before, or you get another kind of form of politics. So you have to think, how do we change the whole form of politics and consumerism and energy, everything. So that you've got to really go back to square one. Well, if you've still got Topshop and you've still got the same mortgages and the same
rents,
credit schemes,
it's pointless.
It is.
It's just pointless.
It's just got a different coloured, credit card. That's about it.
Yeah.
Sugar magnolia, blossoms blow. That's all they do, I don't care. So my baby down by the river, wishing I could come up soon, but there